out, and it's always sold out well in advance of the event. And these are the coolest events because it's the time that we come together to design our lives. And tonight we're designing ourselves as managers. And one of the cool and hard things about being a manager is it's not easy and it's not intuitive. It's like parenting. It's like I had to take a parenting class, and during the course of the parenting class, I realized, oh, I can take all of this back to my office and use it there too. Like it's not intuitive. It's really very hard. And tonight managing is designing, and we want to be able to manage ourselves to bring out the best in others. And one of the big stats out there is that people don't quit companies, they quit what? Managers. They quit managers. So it makes sense that we would want to get the best out of the people that we're managing. It helps everybody be successful. And that's the goal tonight, is to learn from some smart leaders who bring out the best in their people. And I'll bring out our panelists now. We have, I guess I should see what order we're in. Let's just popcorn. Okay. Rick Byrne, everybody from Unity. And then we have Bryn Evans from Google. Bryn. And we have Susana Rodriguez from Apple. And we have Jennifer Sonderby from SF MoMA. And I got to hang out with these fine people back in the green room there. And I cannot believe you're amongst luminaries. You guys will be blown away when you hear the kind of work they've been doing. But before we do that, AIGA is your organization, and it's here to serve you. Everything we do is to serve our members and bring you content and inspiration and cool stuff. And so I want to know, how many of you that are here, is this your first event? If it's your first event, will you raise your hand? Cool. You're about a quarter of the room. So if you're feeling lonely, don't. There's plenty of new people here. One of the things we like to do is build community. So we're going to spend the first 4 minutes of tonight getting to know somebody next to you who you don't already know. And the topic of conversation is, you're going to tell them either about the best boss you've ever had or the worst boss you've ever had, or manager. So think about that and have this quick, deep conversation. This is rich stuff about where you had the best or the worst boss and what that was like. 2 minutes and then switch, okay? Ready, set, go. haven't switched. Okay, start to wrap up your conversation. Okay, come on back to me. Okay, wrap up your conversation. We can continue afterward. Just put a pin in it. Okay, thanks. Just press pause and you can pick it up right after the event. That's awesome. Sounded like there's some good conversations. I'm so happy about that. If you're currently managing people, will you raise your hand? I want to know. Okay. It's about half the room. If you're about to be managing or you're planning on that and trying to get ready, will you raise your hand? Okay. That's about a quarter. So it's just nice for us to know who we're talking to. Now I want to introduce the panelists in depth, but the best way to do that is to actually make them introduce themselves. And the task I've given them is birth to today in 2 minutes. So, Jennifer, do you want to take it away?
Sure.
Okay.
With a lean towards explaining bosses.
Oh, yeah. And if you could just highlight as you go, here, you can pull that mic out.
Okay.
Highlight as you go, like, you don't have to go into depth yet, but you might say, like, this, I worked here, and this is the best boss I ever had, and I worked here, and maybe with this.
Okay. 2 minutes. Everybody got the timer on here? So born in Chicago. I loved babysitting. And had several amazing bosses when I was babysitting. Then moving into high school, I actually taught gymnastics. And I loved my bosses in gymnastics. They pretty much let me be able to do what I did best, which was teach, but then provided guidance when I needed it. Moving into college, I painted houses in college, and I hated that job, and didn't enjoy the boss very much. Is this, okay, I don't know what's going on.
We're just turning you
We're
up.
just trying to turn you up a little louder. Please keep going.
Like it's getting louder. So out of college, I went to the University of Kansas. I was progressively, go Jayhawks, go Jayhawks.
Go Jayhawks! Woo! Rock Chalk Jayhawks!
Moving continuously west. So went to the University of Kansas. I really wanted to go to an undergraduate school that had lots of different things going on, not just design. And I got that piece. I got an art history degree while I was getting my visual communications degree, and moved out to California promptly afterwards. I went through a series of bosses early on in my career that were not, I would not chalk them up as my favorites. I think when you're young in your career, at least in mine, I was kind of learning the ropes a little bit and learning what worked for me and what didn't, and found that some of the most awful bosses were the ones that I learned the most from. And so when I finally got to the point in my career when I was managing, which I kind of did, pushing and shoving because I didn't know if I wanted to be there. I actually enjoyed being the person doing the little pixel thing for a really long time. When I got to that stage, I was really looking at some of the most amazing managers. The one that I currently have, who is his title is Chief Content Officer at the museum, and essentially he just functions as my support mechanism, allowing me to take risks, fail when I need to fail, and excel in the way that I need to excel as on my own growth kind of trajectory. And with that, I'm going to hand it over.
I was born in Madrid, Spain, the only child of a family of bankers and lawyers. So I grew up thinking that I was the boss. That was a big mistake. And really feeling that I didn't belong in that family, even though I loved them so much. Because I wanted to be a painter. So thinking that I needed to leave Spain, I did. And somehow I ended in Pennsylvania studying painting. Will always be a mystery. But I did, and so I got a degree in painting. And I returned to Spain after that, thinking that I would get a job. But that didn't happen, not in painting, because you don't do that. So, because by some little mistake and accident, I ended up being mostly coffee girl in an advertising agency where I would draw storyboards. And one day a lot of the art directors were gone and I was able to do the job, and I said, oh, well, maybe I can do this. And I kind of liked it. And in that agency, I met the worst and best boss I've had in some ways, because they were really mean, but they were so talented, and I wanted to be like them. Not in the way they led, but in the way they worked. So that's what made me love design. And then after that, I went to Chicago, where I did a lot of artwork for music labels, and also an accident that I ended up there. And then I came to San Francisco, and I was creative director of Wired magazine for a few years. And I got my first big management job there because the person who was there before me left. So I took that job really unprepared, and I grew by force, like I had to. And then after that, I spent 11 years in a company called SY Partners, Don Yamashita, where I was the ECD. And the company grew from 25 people when I started to almost 200 by the time I left. And now at Apple, it's many different people, and it's mostly cross-functional, so many different groups of people that I have to somehow make sure they get along. Throughout the way, I had 4 kids that are now the oldest two they will go to college in a year and a half, and the youngest one is 9. So that's my story.
Wow. Hard to compete.
My name is Bryn Evans. I was actually born here in Palo Alto, and then moved to Pennsylvania because my father was a professor at Carnegie Mellon. So we moved. He spent his whole career there, though. So I grew up in Pennsylvania, and I think the things that marked my childhood that defined me are that I loved everything. I drew a lot, and I played a lot of sports. I actually wrote my application to Stanford in high school about the big red bat that I got when I was 3 years old, and I started playing baseball. That was the essay that got me into Stanford. It's probably a terrible essay. But as I think back, I really think that being a sports player, especially on team sports, and liking a position of, I was much more sort of an attack and offensive player in most of my sports, but leading teams and having great coaches, that really shaped how I think about how I like to work with people in the world. I really didn't do much work in high school or college besides babysitting. I did a lot of that. I actually helped raise a family of 4 from the time the oldest 2 were about 3 and 2, and then they were all born up until they're now 25, 24, and 22 and stuff. I know, but it was a wonderful experience. When I came to Stanford, though, so I came back out west. Both of my parents went to Stanford. I always thought, oh, I'm going to go to Stanford. And then I got it in my head in high school that that is crazy. It was the only school I applied to. Luckily, I got in with the big red bat story. And I was pretty sure I wanted to study the brain. So I started taking a bunch of neuroscience and psychology courses around the brain, like very brainy stuff. It wasn't like HCI related, like how people think and act and behave. It was much more like neurons and processes. And it culminated with a class at the medical school that is perhaps my favorite class ever, where I had a brain for a whole quarter. And it was my brain that I got to dissect and study, and I had to bring it to the final exam. We had a brain portion of our final exam and a written portion of our final exam. I thought this was fascinating until I graduated and realized this is not what I want to do. And there was no jobs when I graduated. It was like a big recession. So I got a job in San Francisco in a neuroscience lab, measuring people's brain waves while they were doing cognitive tests when they were on some sort of drug. Usually like an anti-epilepsy drug or an antidepressant drug, but also alcohol and marijuana. We had sort of our own like government supply of that, and so we had fun parties is what we called it, where we would test people out. And I really liked this. I thought research was fascinating and people were so interesting. But the thing I was really drawn to at that company was designing the exercises that people use to perform their cognitive tests. And so I think I sort of credited to my first design task was making a game for kids so that kids with epilepsy, when they came in, they could be sort of distracted by this game, but we could actually test the validity of different types of new drugs on them, and they were sort of entertained by this game at the same time. So that was my first design project. I had no design experience. But after this, I realized that's really what I wanted to do, so I went back to grad school in San Diego in the cognitive science program there and focused in HCI. I ended up leaving that program because I decided at that point I really wanted to just be designing, and it was not a design-focused program. It was definitely an academic program. But I got training and thinking there. And then I did a lot of freelancing where I didn't have a boss. I started a startup with a friend of mine. We were kind of each other's bosses. And in the end, he was not a good supportive partner. I think that happens a lot in startups or like in really, really small teams. Also where you're kind of on an equal foot, but one sort of thinks he did more product, I did more design, and it was a questionable, like, who was really the responsible one. And then I worked at an agency for a little while. Again, not so much of a boss. I mean, we had one, but it was more just like working with clients, which I really loved. I loved being able to bounce around to a lot of different projects, try different things, be super creative, give clients the range of options that you were talking about earlier. I really love that. I sometimes miss that today. And then I joined Google 5 years ago, which I love. But it's a very different place from being at an agency or a startup or doing your own stuff. And about 3 years ago, I became a manager, mostly out of necessity. I think I led a project successfully, and a bunch of people were like de facto working with me, and then my manager said, you need to be a manager. He's like, I'm leaving, you've got to do it. And I was interested, but I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew how to design products and like build great things. So it's been 3 years, and I've learned a lot. I've had a couple good managers in that time and a couple bad managers in that time. I feel like I'm constantly learning myself. I think a lot about what I am looking for in a manager and try to give that back to my team. But I don't know all the answers. I just know that I love what I do, and I think as you're engaged in learning more, you will continue to get better.
Thanks, Bryn.
This one on. So my name is Rick Byrne. Maybe you can tell from my accent I was born originally in Dublin in Ireland a long time ago. Then I truncate a bit. I worked for a couple of years as a designer, and then I went to London's Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design to do a very, very intense master's program there. And then as soon as I left, I actually, within a week, joined the British Army of my own choice, where I learned very intensely how to manage and lead. Hence, this is why this subject is very passionate to me. And I got to meet the head of the course a few months later and said, you know, that master's program was really intense, but my first weekend as a recruit was far harder. And they would say things like, okay, all of you in the front row, pick up the guy behind you and carry them up that hill, fast. So you learn to pick up these very immediate skills where you have to assess things very fast and so on. And you can, within a certain framework, shout at people, but out of context, that sounds bad. You're not trying to shout at them to get your way. A lot of the time, it's safety things, like an assault course. It's like, you know somebody's going to break their arm if they keep doing that thing because somebody did it last week, and things like that. And you're around, you know, weapons with live rounds and so on. So there's an awful lot of necessary sort of sternness. I would say I did not carry that into my various roles as a manager, but it made me much more aware of what people need as managers, because I did various courses on command and control and being a leader basically in the military. So then I left that, met my wonderful wife while on vacation here in San Francisco, and here I am many years later, 2 sons, and that brought me here, where I've managed in several jobs. Currently I'm not managing any one person in particular. I do work with a lot of developers in China and Copenhagen, which is really annoying because they're either 8 hours ahead of me or 8 hours behind me, but never in my time, which makes it really infuriating trying to give them creative direction on things. So in, say, different roles I've had, I've often ended up being the guy who manages a lot of emergencies. Again, that goes back probably to the military training. Like when I was at CBS Interactive, where I was for 6.5 years, I said, oh, you really need to segment all of these emergency projects because they derail everything, so that the rest of the team can kind of be calmer in how they do things or approach design in a reasonable way, dealing with a lot of clients, as Bryn was saying. The clients generally tended to create the emergency, so after a while, suddenly I was managing a whole team of people that just did emergencies, which then grew into a team that just did everything to do with clients, and everybody else did everything not to do with clients. And I didn't realize it would end up that way, but it was just a hunch that these were totally different types of projects. And started hiring people, because these were quick turnaround projects, started hiring people who were impatient. Because these people would do it fast, and they would get it done, and they'd be happy, and they'd have achieved something like one round of whatever it was, ads or design in one day. And the kind of people who are on the other half of the team, the other half of the group, did not like quick turnaround projects and the kind of emergencies that clients generally create. And so then they were happy doing these longer term projects. So purely by hiring by personality at a team that had virtually no turnover in the time that I managed it, which is always a key thing I look for in managers. Like, what's the turnover of the team like? Because as Amy was saying earlier, people often don't leave jobs, they leave managers. So currently I'm at a company called Unity with Jose, who's there in the second row. And that is basically a gaming platform or gaming engine. About a third of all games in iTunes store are actually made with Unity. You've played games you just didn't know. It's known in the gaming industry, but not necessarily known by just ordinary people on the street. Pokemon Go is our big game this year.
Wow.
And that's where I currently am at the moment, as a creative lead. And that's me.
Thanks, Rick. I just want to thank the creative group again for the salary guide, because it's making a really good fan. You could probably vend these down the aisles, and actually people would pay you money right now for them. This building is like eco-friendly, so the AC shuts off at 5 or something, and it's just always so hot in here at night. So if you're feeling hot, that's why it's actually really hot in here. Okay, you had a moment to think about like a best boss and a worst boss earlier, and I want just some quick popcorn things. Will you shout out thinking about that your like worst boss and this this framework actually, has anyone read the book Multipliers? As you like really start leading and realizing you don't know anything, you start reading a lot of books about managing. I read a lot of books about managing because I run my own company. This book is really good. It's by Liz Wiseman. And the premise of the book is like, you know, why do some leaders make everybody smarter around them and some leaders can take the same people and not get as much out of them? And she explores that in depth. And so I highly recommend that book to you. But let's talk about some behaviors that a bad boss has done. Like, think about your bad boss. Will you just popcorn off some things that happened to you or some concrete behaviors from them? Yeah, shout it out. Made you anxious. Yeah.
Bipolar.
Okay. Never knew where they were. This way, that way, hot and cold. Yeah. What else?
Doesn't respect your time.
Didn't respect what you brought to the team or to the project. Sorry, shout it out. Micromanaged, yeah.
Doesn't understand what you do.
Oh, he doesn't even know what you do. Hasn't taken the time to find out what their direct reports are actually doing. That's interesting. What else?
Doesn't communicate.
Doesn't communicate. Contradicts.
Manipulative.
Manipulative.
Doesn't back you up.
Doesn't back you up.
Manages up.
Oh yeah, I've actually seen that in my team. Yeah, manages up, not down. More? And what did they get out of you? Like, if you were to think about your capability and your percentage, like 0 to 100, like you might have been working really hard for this person, but how much of your intelligence could they actually get? What would you say? How much of your intelligence? Like, how much did they really harness?
Very little.
Yeah, not a lot.
I think a lot up front and then it dwindles.
A lot of your effort, but maybe not a lot of your genius.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a client, and I can think of clients kind of like managers sometimes, who was treating my team like a wrist. Like, she would be very, do this exact thing, very descriptive, instead of treating them like they had a brain and inviting their intelligence, and then kept, like, the project just wasn't going well, and they're like, well, she just keeps dictating what we're supposed to do, and we don't agree. You know, it was kind of an interesting thing that we had to deal with, and that was like, she wasn't getting the best out of my team, right? Getting like 40% of what could have been 100. And when you're working for somebody like that, and they're getting, let's say, 50% of your genius, how does that feel? Yeah. It doesn't feel good. And it can be really exhausting, actually. You can be overworked and underutilized, right? You can work really, really hard and not be able to utilize all of your potential, and it just feels really bad. What do you think that those managers, what's their like belief about their team, if you were to sum it up?
They're there to serve them.
They're there to make the manager look good.
They're to make the manager look good. They're the means to an
Trying
end.
to show their significance by tearing down.
Yeah, trying to show how important they are. Taking credit for all your ideas. Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of times it's the idea that like no one's going to figure this out without me because I'm really important. Whether they're just saying the thing you just said louder than you said it, or or treating you in lots of different ways. So let's think about the good boss. Like, what are some things they did for you that empowered you? What else?
Give you feedback on a regular basis.
Feedback on a regular basis. Lots of transparency there in communication. Listen to you. Encouraged, mentored. Trusted.
Backed you up when you needed it.
Yeah, backed you up.
This kind of goes with like they provide resources.
Provided you with
Maybe
the
not tell you
resources you
exactly,
needed.
but just be like.
Right. Yeah. provided you some resources and some tools to get done what you wanted. Acknowledged your work, acknowledged your ideas, maybe knew what your job was. That'd be good. And what did, like, how much did they get out of you, realistically, thinking about your genius, not your effort, but your genius? Did they get a lot more? Yeah. And what do you think that their belief was about their team and about you?
I think we were incapable.
They're capable, yeah.
Appreciation.
Yeah, they appreciate your genius. Yeah, I think the default belief, and this comes from Liz Wiseman's book as well, is they are smart and they're going to figure it out. I think when you have that belief, like these people are smart and they'll figure it out, you behave differently towards them than you do if you don't have that belief. And I wanted to take you, the whole reason I just did that is because I wanted to take you to this place of really thinking about the people who got the best out of you, and you can, there's story after story. Leaders Eat Last has some really good stories from Simon Sinek about this, like, you know, this guy who was, I think it was an army story, he was like the worst guy on this one team, and he moved to this other team, and he was the best guy. And they were like, well, what's the difference? This is the same guy. And then Simon Sinek goes into what it was that in the management and the leadership of that guy that brought out his best versus got the worst out of him. And I want us to be thinking about that too. You're all managers, you're aspiring managers, and you're smart. All of you are really smart, I already know this, and you want to get the best out of your people. So let's think about those characteristics we just talked about and move through tonight with designful intention to harness those things and take it back to our jobs. So, and I think it would be great if you write down like the big news for yourself tonight when you hear something that kind of hits, like, oh yeah, that's the thing for me. Something that you can act on tomorrow that you can really use. Okay, now to our panelists. Let's just start at the very beginning. Do you have to go in, like, think about your career path. Do you have to go into management, or are there other ways to be successful? I just want to start by acknowledging if people are feeling pushed into management positions, what does that mean for them? And you can just go as you choose. I'm not going to say who should go first. Yeah.
I'll just start.
Yeah.
So I feel it's often expected of you, whether you want it or not, or whether your current role involves management. It's just you're good at the core skill, so people think, oh, you can just manage other people who are good at the core skill. As in, it's just an assumption in many roles.
Yeah, you have to. That's the next step. Jennifer, do you have to move into management to be successful?
No, I think that, typically there's like these layers of sort of movement, within larger companies, but obviously being a creative person, there's many different ways that you can be successful, and working for yourself is one of those options that you have. Working for yourself, you're going to be doing a lot of everything. Sometimes people don't want that, and then you're adding other people in to help support you in that. But absolutely, I don't think you have to manage to be successful. It depends on what your goals are.
I'd add that at a place like Google, really big company, it often feels like you're forced into a management position because that's when you get bigger and better projects. And the way to be more successful is to step into that sort of role. But one of the nice things about working at a big company like Google is there are so many teams, small startup-y teams, creative teams that are trying to just find new patterns to apply to a space like VR or some other new frontier for us, where you can actually be very senior and have a lot of scope and influence without needing to manage, but sort of find these pockets of teams, or even create your own team. So I think that bigger organizations can sometimes support that in spite of what it might seem like.
It's funny, in Spain you don't have the word manage, you have the word dirigir, which is to direct. And it's a very different way of thinking about things, because it means you set a direction. And to me that's always been a better form of leading. I don't think I'm a manager and my job is to manage. That never inspired me. It's what is the work, what is the mission, where are we going, and who has to come along and lead them there together. So no, I don't feel that it has to be management. as the next thing. It has to be achieve something, direct the work there. And so.
I love that. I like that, thinking about it as a director. That's cool. Direction setting, because it's not really about telling all the pieces what to do. It's about leading, setting that direction. Will you tell everybody what you're going to be doing for work in a week, Susanna?
Yeah, so I'm one more week at Apple, and after that I'll be VP of Brand Experience at IBM Watson. So that'll be
Cool, huh? Awesome. I just got chills because everyone was happy for you.
Yeah.
I like it. Yeah, and she'll be building up a whole new team. So that's a whole new direction setting. Which way do we turn? What people do we need? How do you lead and build that from scratch? That's cool. I've definitely seen, even just working with my clients, people who are miserable because they're leading a team, and what they really want and what's in their heart is to be a really good individual contributor. They just want to be the best art director they can possibly be, and they have no interest in managing people. And I think that can be okay, and it can be negotiated in your workplaces. It's not necessarily the way I make more money and move up is to manage more and more people. Sometimes if you're super valuable to the organization, you can say, I just want to be producing, and I want to be producing in this way, and can we make is there a career path for me here, and can I make more money doing that and not stepping into the management role? So if in case any of you are sitting here feeling I don't want to be a manager, we've covered it. Okay, so what do you do when your team is stuck? To lead them and... Sorry, my mic, I think, is doing that. Yeah, what do you do when your team is stuck? Will you talk to us about that?
What are the movies? We're stuck now. We should lead our way out of this.
That mic was getting, Bryn's holding it, that's fine. Sorry, go ahead.
It's you.
I think it's this pen. I put it right here in it.
I'm glad we sorted that one out. What do you do when your team is stuck?
Oh.
It's hard. So as a manager, you end up with problems coming to you all day, every day. And somehow you have to stay sane throughout that. And sometimes, a lot of the time actually, the people who are coming to you with these problems often know the answer, and they're almost needing a sounding board to somehow get that problem out of them. And I often found people would come in to your office and they knock, I've got this problem, and blah, 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 and we need to do this by the end of the day, and the VP says this, and blah, 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 and you told me that, and blah, 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 and it's they're just blurting. So the best thing to do is just let them say everything they have to say. Don't interrupt, because part of it is they just need to hear the problem being spoken out loud. And then within that, often it gives you time to think about what it is you're going to say when they need direction. Just almost like the other panelists are thinking, my God, thank God he's speaking first. It gives me time to think about this answer. Because there was a moment of silence where we're all thinking, who goes first? It's the same kind of thing. It's like a lot of the time that pause, that moment of calm, helps you and helps them. And then a lot of the time, as they articulate the problem, they might have said the solution, they just don't realize it, or it gives you time to pull bits from their articulation of the problem and give a solution back to them.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to say, I need to think about this, can I get back to you in an hour? But a lot of the time, they often just need to know that you're going to get back to them with something in an hour, and they can write down. Because a lot of being a manager can be also managing their kind of expectations of you and emotions and so on. And then meanwhile, given the time to think, you might come up with a brilliant solution, or you might not. And you can go back to them and say, look, I'm not sure, but I trust your judgment. What do you think we should do? And sometimes that's all people need, like we talked about earlier, the latitude to actually use your brain and think for yourself. So it's not that there is always a thing to do, but maybe a process, which often involves just staying calm, so that you have time to think and they have time to think. Which can often be hard under such a deadline-driven profession as we have.
That's a beautiful, you're like a mentor and a coach and a therapist to them. Because I think people really do, often I find when I'm having a problem, I'm lawyering up in my head, I've built this huge case and I just need to say it out loud and then I can think again. I say these things out loud and okay, now I'm ready to solve the problem. And I have a coach, who I talk to every week, and usually when I'm asking about something I'm wrestling with, he'll just say in like a monk voice, like, "Well, what do you think you should do?" And I'll be like, "Well, I was sort of hoping you might have an idea, But usually I do have an idea of what I should do, and I can bring that to my people. So they'll help listen and then ask them, like, "Okay, let's say I don't have any ideas on that. Like, what would you do?" And it's not that they might have the actual like perfect solution, but there might be like the starter of some good thinking that it like helps them get going, rather than launching in with, "I'll tell you what we should do," which kind of shuts down their genius. Yeah. What else? What do you guys do when people are stuck? Susanna, you look like you have something.
No?
We get together as a group and talk about it. I mean, it's very simple, but oftentimes you're struggling with something, that's whether it's you and a small team, but we found that working towards this collective mind, that we always come out with stronger solutions as a group, and no matter how small the issue is, it's always been hugely beneficial to talk about it as a team. And when that can't happen, then it's working with whoever's around, and we're in an office environment where we share it with many other different groups, and so sometimes it's just putting the stuff up and having people walk by that aren't even on our team and have a conversation about it. That will help bring new perspective to the conversation. That'll help you through it. So, I think it's pretty basic, but just communicating about it, much to, just talking through it. Human beings like to talk about things. So finding somebody to talk about it with is been great.
Something that I try to do most of the time when people are stuck, they're panicking. And I think the first thing to do is to stop panicking. And that's number one. Because you can't think when you're panicking. So what I try to do is first try to talk about what is actually the problem. Because sometimes it's something really small. Sometimes it's, well, somebody didn't send me something, and sometimes it's a resource thing, it's a politics thing, sometimes it's they're exhausted. And it's a different solution for any of that, and most of the time it does present itself on its own. But first is calm down, it's not the end of the world, ever. And what is the problem? And a lot of the times it's, I don't have the solution, they have it. And once you identify it, you can go there. Most of the time when people are stuck though, I feel that it's getting back to the core of why we're doing what we're doing helps. Because you get so lost in the day-to-day mechanics, and it gets so boring, so uninspiring. So when you remember collectively, okay, why are we doing this? Wow, we are very excited about this, actually. And then figure out how to get back there. And leading to me with that mission, that sense of inspiration, that usually makes things a little bit easier, generally.
Anything to add, Fran?
I'm thinking of things to add.
Yeah.
I've done everything that's been described here because when you're stuck, it really depends on why you're stuck. That sort of direct your solution. I think hearing them out is definitely a good way to go. Talking to people is a really good way to go. So if I were to add one thing, it's that as designers, so I work at a big company like Google, and we build products that people like you use. And so in that process, in developing products, could be any number of things that cause a project to get stuck. What I do is I try to understand why the thing is stuck, like what's the piece that's not helping us move forward. And then I try to think of to add on to what they're saying, because I would do all of those things first. What do we bring as designers to this process that's uniquely a design thing? Is it a way to think about the holistic problem? Is it that there's like sort of a piece of creativity that's missing, so we could like take a step back and rethink some things like through a design sprint or through another creative brief. Like, why not write another one? Like, we've probably changed our thinking a little bit. And another thing I try to do is buy my team more time. You can surprisingly buy your team a lot more time, even when you're told your deadline is Friday. I have right now a deadline Friday, and I don't believe it. I've told them, no, actually, you have 2 weeks. And we're a little bit stuck right now, but I've been able to basically buy us a little bit more time, which makes my designers feel like they have a little bit more breathing room, a little bit more time to think this through, try to make them more calm. I guess things like that, and maybe the one last thing I've done when I've seen teams be stuck is I find one person on the team who could directly change this outcome. It's usually like a head PM or a VP. And if I can talk directly to them about what the core issue is, they often see there's other solutions here besides me working with my team. But maybe it's worth getting a couple other people brought in, or getting a VP from another org to come have a conversation with us, which we've also done. So I think like identifying the root cause and sort of like understanding the macro and the micro of your problem.
I think the common thread between all of your behaviors is some element of handing back the pen, like stepping in, helping like reset the direction, whether it's revisiting a creative brief or anything else. But then like not shutting down their intelligence by being like, I know how to do this, we're gonna go my way. But like kind of like helping get them unstuck and then handing back the pen and like, okay, now I trust you to figure this out from here. We're moving again. I like, Bryn, what you hit on with like, so I just promoted 2 people and my organization's been completely flat. And I just promoted 2 people who've been colleagues and peers and equals with everybody else. And I decided that their informal title, they're the guardians. And I picked that, and I didn't realize it until Susanna, you said, until Bryn, you were saying, like, I go to bat for them. I buy them more time. I guide them, like, we'll rewrite the creative brief. I'll do, like, it's sort of like guarding this team so that they can produce. Because what you want is a team that is smart as possible and as capable as possible, right? And part of that is going to bat for your team and guarding them. And so I want to talk more about that. And I don't know what the question is in this, but, like, can we talk about the ways in which you protect your team, or you like shepherd them and guard them, care for them? And I think just buying more time is one genius way. I'm looking for like, what are some things people can take back tomorrow? Like,
I spend a lot of time talking to people outside of the team that I manage directly. And as I understand more about their goals, their timelines, projects that are coming down the pipe, critical things that might hit, but we gotta wait a few weeks to see if it's gonna really be a big deal. I do a lot of that. It's sort of like blocking,
right,
but it's also just sort of like reconnaissance.
Yeah.
And knowing like what's coming.
Knowing what's motivating them, knowing what's coming.
Yeah. And then I sort of selectively choose to share some of that to people on my team. I heard, when I became a manager, one of my managers said, your role now is to be the shit shield. And you're going to hear a whole bunch of shit and you never want to pass that on to your team.
Oh, interesting.
I don't believe that. Because I always found that if I knew a little bit about what was happening beyond me, I could do my job better. So I try to relay the stuff that I think is important to people. Don't like throwing surprises on them.
Yeah.
So like if something big might happen next week, I might hint at it.
Yeah.
I might try to like make them not worry about it right now, but in case that happens, then think about this.
So being hyper aware of what's going on in the ecosystem, that helps serve your team. Yeah. What other ways do you find you're guarding your teams or setting them up to succeed?
So I have an analogy from the military. So in the military, you have a philosophy called interoperability. So what is that? So say, for example, you are a sergeant and you report into a lieutenant who reports into a captain, and basically both of them could be shot at any moment and you have to take over. So you are always taught to think at that level, 2 levels above you. So you know what's going on, and in a crisis or emergency, or just even when you're left alone, left fallow to do something ordinary, you know the bigger picture. So every orders session has this 2 levels above what is the main mission. So that every single soldier knows what is going on. It's the opposite of what you're saying of not having people know, but like they know because they might have to do it. Now, obviously, most soldiers do not end up in combat even. So, but the entire system is based around you knowing what is expected of not just you, but everyone around you and the people above you all the time. It doesn't mean that things aren't withheld, but that interoperability principle means that the entire group or section or whatever the unit is, group of people trying to work towards a common goal knows what is going on all the time. And I tried to do that then when I've managed teams, just so that they would know. And essentially when I was training people into the team, I would tell them this process and I would tell them what's going on, and I would tell them that my goal is so that one day you will not need me. You will be able to do my job and I'll be doing something else, rather than keep people down in their sort of individual contributor role. I'd elevate them up. It's kind of the reverse of the pyramid. And I just literally tell them, my role here in training you in is so that someday you do not need me. You are so good at doing this job.
More to add?
I agree with everything. Something that I try to do always is bring people along in decision making. So sometimes you need to make a decision, yes or no, you're doing something, but if you provide context for people for why this is, and even ask them, are you comfortable with this? Because this decision, if we say we're going to do this, it means all this amount of work, it means going against this other thing, it means taking all these risks. Are you in? Are you out? And I will trust them. If they're not in, I know them. The team one team that I've worked with for years. I brought them from place to place. I trust them completely. So if they tell me they can't, or whatever worries they have, I will listen. So they feel protected that way too, because they know it's not just me going off and everybody goes with me. And sometimes I will ask for them to take a leap of faith, but I will always talk to them. And I think that goes for a lot. Building trust.
That's beautiful. Do you have anything to add to that?
I think you guys covered it.
I remember talking once, this is something I learned, like it was one of the first lessons, but I was talking to one of my people I managed and I was like, it's like this. He's like, okay, yeah, it's like that. And then I was like, he doesn't believe me, or he's not buying in. And I was like, but you don't think so? And he's like, no, I think, and then like opened up this thing and it allowed him to like share a different perspective with me, where he was like pretending to be on board, but like kind of listening for that and inviting it out is kind of amazing, right? Things that you can learn. So I'm wondering if you guys can give me some free advice. So I just promoted these two people, right? And they used to be peers of everybody else in the office and equals. And I didn't promote them because they were smarter than anybody else. They just were the right people for what I need. And there's a lot of genius in the organization, and there's a lot of capacity and growth, and there will be other leaders. And so I'm trying to walk this balance of like, how do I set these people up to be successful while not like pissing off their colleagues? And I thought I was doing a pretty good job, and then I overheard one of my colleagues' girlfriends say to another one, so what do you think about Jeff being your boss now? And he's like, oh, I don't think of him as my boss. And I was like, oh no, I failed. I have not set this guy up to be that, like, no, he's your boss now. And they are not seeing them that way. So you've probably experienced this, and I'm sure people in this room are kind of dealing with this too. How do you empower some of your other people who may have been peers? Have you seen this, where have you seen this go really right, and where have you seen it go wrong, just so we know, like.
Well, I think stepping out of the way of this person is important, and giving them the space to actually move into the new role. Similar situation at the museum where we have a couple different layers, and when that person moved into that new role, it really was not. It was literally stepping out so that this person could be the one face and be talking in dialogue with the direct reports, and that could be hard for the people that are, promoting, because you have to trust once again that the person's going to do a good job. But it's also helped to put them on a project together specifically, like give them a common, exciting goal to achieve together and in the new roles, and give them and let that new person provide the leadership and construct sort of how that relationship's going to set the course of that relationship through that one particular project. But that's not necessarily, I think it's important that the person that's actually, say, the designer level, and you've got an art director, the designer level in that relationship has very specific responsibilities. It's not just being told by this other person what they're doing. So, I mean, at the base level, it's basically making room for that person to be a leader, just like you want the person that, say, be above you to give you the room to be the leader.
I have sort of done this on my team recently, and one thing I did in addition to that is, first of all, I didn't make the change immediately. I have made it over the course of several months. I've tried to coach them sort of into that role before making it official, the change. And then I also have had many conversations with both the new manager and then the one who was not the manager, what their specific roles were, what their responsibilities were, and why. And for the person who we were not putting in the manager position, spent a lot of time with that person explaining both how this will be really beneficial to her, and what my goals are for her. So it's not like you're not being promoted, it's that we have separate goals for you. You're a different person, you've got different interests, you have your own path. And having that conversation a couple times with both of them has seemed to help a lot. And over the last few months, the person who was not in the promoted position has completely changed her attitude and her work style, and she's way more productive, and she loves this new person, and it's really working well for them. I think they have good dynamic as well, like that's always important. Just like with a mentor and a mentee, you just need to have a dynamic there for it to be good. But I think doing it a little bit gradually, knowing it takes time, and then being very explicit about the roles and responsibilities for everybody, and maybe repeating that once.
Awesome. More?
So you were saying how, so you are kind of the queen of your domain, so to speak, in Big Monocle, your agency. So that in theory, there's no one above you. And you said you had a kind of flat organization beforehand, and these various people would report into you and talk to you directly. And now you're creating managers that is creating a level between you and, we'll say, the bottom tier, whatever that might be. We'll call it entry level. It's probably not entry level. We'll call it that. So if that level didn't exist beforehand, they're probably more reacting to, hey, we're in this egalitarian system where there's just one leader, to now like, hang on, there's more leaders, and I'm not one of them.
Yeah.
So they want that direct hotline to you, essentially. So as Bryn was saying, they still want that hotline, but they might necessarily have the role. There's a certain amount of hubris surrounding, like, well, they probably have more salary, or they have the title.
Right.
And that's one thing I learned in coming to the US, that titles are really important here, whereas coming from Europe, they were far less important. No one really cared that much. So in some way, if they still want that direct interpersonal relationship with you, you could focus on that. And that way it gives them something non-concrete to latch onto. However, it could still be a conduit for undermining the person who's the manager. You just have to be careful of that. But it might just be personal time with you that is part of the equation.
Yeah, making sure they feel that. I love that idea of making sure they all see their career path and their growth. But it's not, and I really do feel like, you know, I didn't just choose the two smartest people or something. There's like genius everywhere. So I want to talk about how you set direction for a team and like honor their intelligence and their genius, or like how you might kick off a project, or how do you set the direction? And I love this idea of setting the direction for your team. I know that's kind of is that too amorphous of a question? Okay, good, because I kind of want to know a little bit more about that. You can frame that however you like, okay, when I'm starting a project, this is how I bring out their genius, or,
I'm going to tell you an anecdote that happened to me very early in my career, and even though it was very traumatic, it really taught me the value of remembering why we're doing what we're doing. So I was in Chicago, and I was working at a company called VSA Partners, and I was given my first book. I was senior designer. I was so happy that I had this big assignment. And there was a book for the CEO of Coca-Cola had just passed away, and we needed to do a book to commemorate his life. And so I spent 3 weeks designing, and I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was perfect type and the colors, and so proud of myself. And the partner there hadn't really spent much time with me on this, but finally, the Sunday at 9 p.m. the day before we had to show it, he came. And I had everything. It was a big magnet wall, metal wall with it, magnets. Had everything up, and I was like, okay, this is slam dunk, right? So he came in, he looked at it. He barely knew who I was, but he came in and he took every piece of paper and put it down.
Oh.
And then put up 5 pieces of blank paper. And even though that part was very traumatic, but what comes next was great. Because he told me, remember what you're doing. This is not your next portfolio piece. This is really not about you. This is not even about the book. Someone just died. This is an amazing life that this person led. So you just have to remember what you're doing. So first you need to whisper. So he wrote whisper. And then you need to celebrate. And then you need to thank people, because he didn't do this alone. And yeah, it was traumatic that he did it like that. I failed in my big thing as my thing, but I remember why I was doing it. And I will never forget it. So whenever I kick off a project or anything, I don't traumatize people, I don't throw their stuff to the floor, but I never, but I try to, because I want to remember myself, why are we doing this? And it gets complicated, because the bigger the projects are, the bigger the everything, you just think it's a job, and it never is. There's always a reason and a goal. So I try to always start there and get back to that. Sometimes write it big, sometimes just, because that usually realigns everybody.
I think if you had that direction when you started the project, like, thank you, like, that would have been a framework I could have used the whole time. I did have an art school professor, by the way, who would say, he would rip your art, your drawings onto the floor and step on them, and he'd say, this isn't art, this is graphite on dead tree carcass. Anyway, more on this, how do you set direction? How do you help projects go without, I guess, like, leading it or dictating it?
So sometimes, come to Susanna's example, you say the big picture stuff. I'm going to use these military analogies all again because they're going to be slightly different. So an officer says, we need to take that hill by dawn. Okay, all the sergeants then have to work out how. They don't, like, he's sort of the direction.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
So then the sergeants, who are actually the managers, essentially. So as designers, we are leaders and managers at the same time. Most people are. But in the military, it's like all the leaders have a whole separate class almost called officers. And all the managers are NCOs, which are like managers. So I was an NCO. So somebody says, okay, we need to take the hill. What's your plan? So then the big picture would be, we need to take the hill because the A convoy can't get past that bridge because they keep ambushing it from that hill. That's the reason why. So the sergeants would then say, and here's the management part. Okay, one section is going to act as a decoy. They're going to make a lot of noise, fire a lot of bullets, but really they're just a decoy. The other 2 sections are going to go up the side and ambush them from the rear. That's the plan. That's the managing part. Working out how you do the thing. But the leading is we need to take the hill so the A convoy can get through. So with that kind of view, we rarely get a chance to split our minds that way. Often as managers, we think we're leaders, or as leaders, we think we're managers. It's very gooey in most corporate roles. There's a kind of complete blurring of those 2 things. Good managers are assumed to be good leaders, etc., and vice versa. So in a design project, I'll use an anecdote, since we're talking anecdotes. I was training in a designer I worked with at CBS Interactive, Rich, very funny guy. And we were going to present to this very difficult person. And we had to have them approve something in this one meeting. We couldn't go on for rounds and rounds of approvals. So I, as the leader, said, okay, what I need you to do is we need to get this person to approve it now. We'll miss the deadline for these other things. There's so many contingencies. It has to happen. However, putting on the manager hat, here's how we're going to do it. So I said, I mentioned this earlier, do a really bankable, boring version of what she's asked for. She'll kill it, that's okay. She needs to feel empowered. Then go crazy and do something so extreme, you're gonna love it, but it's gonna be too much for her. Don't worry, she's gonna kill that too. Then do what you really think she should be doing, because then when she's killed the other two, she'll actually listen to you. And that's the thing that'll get approved. So we get to the day, like he's been working late, he's coming to the meeting. Now he's never met her before. I've just told him, oh, she's difficult, we need to massage her ego. But don't worry. Do not fight for either of the two extremes. Pretend to fight, but don't really fight. So we present the first idea, the really boring, bankable idea. And he told me afterwards, it took everything within his emotional willpower. He had to grip his leg under the table to prevent himself really fighting for that idea, because he put time into it. But it was our sacrificial goat. It had to die. Same with the really wacky, crazy idea. I told him in advance, it can go in your portfolio, but right now, it has to die too. And it did. And then amazingly, she approved the one that we stage managed she would approve. I said, if you just show her that from the start, she won't feel empowered. She'll have to make some kind of decision. But she'll only get that if she feels she's made decisions before that point. And he could not believe how the entire meeting went exactly the way I said it would. And I was very calm throughout because I knew that this is how it would go, because I'd worked with her before and knew she was different. And so that's both the combination of the leadership hat and the management hat in one role, which most of us have to do as design managers. We're called design managers, or managers and leaders, or directors, as Susanna was saying. So sometimes you can do that. You have both roles simultaneously. So the two never get divorced. People don't necessarily know how to talk about them in those ways, but the assumption is that you know the difference between the two, or often people don't know the difference between the two and kind of group them both together. That's my anecdote that'll help explain those two parts of your brain you need to be a design director.
Yeah, I think the key thing is shifting the responsibility of thinking and solving it from yourself to your team. And that brings out the very best. And I mean, leadership and management direction, it's not, we're talking about it in a little bit of a gentle way because we want to make sure that we're getting the best out of people, but that doesn't mean that we're not demanding and then we don't have high standards and that, it's not that it's easier, it's just that you take that belief in people. That book Multipliers that I mentioned says that you can get up to 2 times the capacity. I think if you talk about how you operated your, how much genius you could give under a diminisher versus a multiplier, it's about double. So you can really, through your leadership, get 2 times the capacity out of your teammate. I want to take it to the room now. We have about 15 minutes, and I want to take these questions fast so we can get through a whole bunch. So maybe one per person, unless one of you can answer, unless you're super passionate about it. You can totally chime in. Let's start on this side of the room over here. Are there questions up over here? Anything bubbling? Yeah, right here in the hot.
How do you, if at all, manage people who have learning disabilities and ADD and executive function disorder, manage their own time, etc.?
How do you manage people who have a disability in terms of ADD, or can't manage their own time, things like that?
I have a little bit of a belief that a lot of creative people have ADD.
Yeah.
Myself included. I have a couple young sons, and it's hard for them to sit still. And the issues that they actually have in school are things that, in talking about these issues, I realized that growing up, I probably had ADD, and I never, I didn't have that as a construct to kind of work against or for when I was growing up. Didn't have a name. And that, you know, as a person, I kind of gravitated towards things that felt good to me and that worked for me. And as a creative, you know, I'm not often sitting down and doing one thing for very long. I'm up and around, and I'm working on things. And at the museum, we're not just doing even one time, you know, we're not even just doing one medium. We're in the galleries, we're in the store, we're down looking at maquettes, trying to figure things out. And it's that type of sort of movement that has kept me, you know, inspires me, I gravitate towards things like that. I find that with my designers too. We are often up, not sitting for very long. And so I would say that, you know, helping folks designers who have issues with prioritization is different than sort of like attention deficit issues. I feel like the attention deficit issues I think can be inspiring in some ways to get you to kind of think differently about what you're doing. But the prioritization, you know, that's going back to sort of helping them to direct them in the right direction and helping with that prioritization if you need, you know, different people, and this is sort of gravitating towards different kinds of needs that your team, you know, some people are going to need a lot of prioritization help, other people are going to need none, and they're going to know exactly what they kind of need to do. And that's just sort of individualizing that attention. So I hope, did that answer your question? Maybe not.
I think it's sort of like figuring out what they need, and it's not like a one size fits all at all. Like
no, I mean, I think
right.
that whether it's those issues or other issues, you're going to individualize what they need to help them to be the most productive person that they can be, and to realize their own creativity through the means that they have. So
I had a designer who suffered from insomnia, and sometimes he was just a wreck, you know, and he's a really talented, capable person, and when he would go long stretches without sleeping, he just couldn't deal. And so we had to adapt for that, like, you know, rather than like trying to keep him on the same schedule as everybody else, like offering some flexibility that helps support him in that, like, you know, so we have like a, you know, protect the asset rule. If you need to take a nap, you just take a nap. And it doesn't mean that you like go 30 minutes early because you slept through 30 minutes, like you like get your hours in, but if you need to take a nap, just take a nap. And more questions. Who's got something burning? Like right here.
So you guys talk a lot about empowering your designers to do their best work and trusting them. And I'm wondering if you have issues with quality control when you do that, because I've noticed that as a manager, I still am kind of the final stop before things go out the door. And so I'm stuck between this place of wanting to empower people to take responsibility and be accountable for their work, but also make sure that bad stuff doesn't go out the door. So I'm wondering.
So the question for the room is like, how do you empower people while quality controlling the work that goes out the door?
Yeah, so, oh, you want to go? Okay.
No, go please.
Both. I'd love to hear from both of you.
Okay, well, sure. Yeah, that's a very good question. I think trust has to go both ways too. So you have to also show that you can make a call at the end, and you can explain why. And sometimes if trusting people doesn't mean that they get to do whatever, and that whatever they do is right. And your job is also to set those standards and to determine what is right and explain it. But to me, it's very important at Apple, for example, it has to be great first. And that is always more important than making people happy, too. It's not about that. That's not your job. Your job is to deliver great work. Hopefully with people who will contribute to it, and you will empower them, and you will explain why, but you can never compromise the work. And they will respect you more for that.
I'll add two things that I do. We also have very high standards at Google. I never let anything go till the last minute before I see it. So I've always been able to have some checks along the way. And sometimes I frame it as a design crit or like a group meeting. So it's not about reviewing with me specifically, other people chime in, but of course I can chime in too. And that way I can make sure the project steers itself in a direction that makes sense for where I think, or where like VPs think that this should be going, you know? And then the second thing is I'm really selective about the places I care a lot about. There's some things that are mission critical, we can't screw it up. Like if we screw it up, my manager gives me shit, his manager gives me shit, our CEO doesn't launch the thing. And I kind of know what those are. And when I give feedback to my team, I frame it that way too. That like these are mission critical, really important things to get right. And those are things where we'll then just sort of have a side work stream, and maybe we'll work more closely together to make sure that's really good. But then the other areas where they've got a lot more creative freedom or much more autonomy over the rest of it, I kind of let it slide. And it's hard for me because I have a very high quality bar, but I think it's important for people to feel they have the space to do it themselves and also learn from their work. Like maybe they do this and the VP comes to them and is like, why did you do it that way? And I'm like, well, see, that's why we really got to care about everything, not just the mission criticals. Like they kind of have to learn that themselves, but because it's not as big a deal, I won't get involved there. And I hope that strikes a good balance between not being too micromanagey, but also caring about like our overall quality bar, since we are all judged on that too.
Yeah, that's very strategic. Like know what matters and know what doesn't. Nothing's worse than getting a call from somebody, a VP or a client that says, "Did you see this before it came to me?" And you're like, "Oh no, what went out the door?" Yeah. So yeah, totally. It just like embarrassingly just happened to me a couple weeks ago with a YouTube influencer we had hired to do something. I didn't look at the first cut of the video, not super worried. We'd worked with them several times. And the client emailed back that it was complete garbage and she wasn't going to use it and we should kill it. And I was like, oh no. And then I watched it and then I had to say, what on earth would make you think we could send that? That's so obviously bad. It wasn't like fringy bad, like maybe this guy wouldn't know. It was like bad. And so we now have a rule, which we didn't really have as like a hard and fast before, that we actually schedule in team meetings at least 24 hours before we're shipping something. Like ideally like a better cadence, but it's sort of like a designful, like we just have to have separate sets of eyes. And I think you can provide that framework to ensure that you're not shipping garbage. But yeah. I think also you can design, I thought I had some really quick, like, if the thinking isn't where it needs to be, you can say, I think that we're not quite there. This is the strategy. Let's do, we call it, it's the wrong name for it. We call it a design-a-thon, but it's not like something you do for a long time and it's like a quick sprint. But we'll just like quantity over quality, no points for good ideas, just points for quality. Like we're gonna do 15 minutes, write down as many ways as you can think to solve this, and like kind of unstick the thinking and bring some new stuff in and create that space. Lots of hands. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna go over to this side of the room real quick. Yeah.
How do you manage expectations in terms of like, how do you know when you're pushing too hard or when it's you versus them? Like I think as designers, we always want something to be better. How do you find that balance?
How do you get more out of your people without killing them? Did I sum that up right? Okay.
I'll go ahead with this one. So one thing we haven't touched on is get to really know the people you're managing. Like not just the work stuff, but like when are their birthdays? I always made sure I had something for all of my direct reports on their birthdays. It's really important to them. It might be minor to you, but the fact that you even know and noticed, like, is a big deal. Like one girl I managed, Michelle, her birthday's the same birthday as one of my sons, so I will know for the rest of my life when her birthday is, and I actually send her something on Facebook. But you have lots of conversations with them. You have lunches with them. You need to know more about them than just how they are to work with and what their work is, but like the fact that maybe they crochet in their spare time and they're like actually number 3 in the world at crocheting or something odd.
And why does that matter?
Yeah, because it's really, really important to them, possibly more important than the job to them.
I think it matters too because it's their discretionary effort that they are able to give, right? Everyone's contractually obligated to give you 8 good hours in a day. That's what the company's buying, right? But that discretionary effort comes from building those relationships.
Exactly.
Sure.
So then you kind of know, like, you'll manage people who can be pushed really hard before they say anything, and people who just the slightest push and they're like, oh, this is too much. And actually, you can't gauge if it's real or not until you really know them. Because different people, like as was touched on earlier, I think by Jennifer, that you can't manage everyone all the same all the time because people are so different. Like as a manager, a key fundamental thing is that you have to manage everyone differently. It would be nice if they were all the same, but they're not. Especially as creatives, we're all wildly different to each other. And so just spend the downtime not talking about work, because that's when you really get to know them, and then you can actually essentially tailor projects or how you push them or timelines to
Yeah.
their individual personality.
Actually care about them, right?
Yes.
One more question, last one, right here. Sorry.
So in a perfect world, you know, the most competent people are promoted on your team and you can consistently rely on them for support. Yet oftentimes decisions about promotions aren't necessarily your own. And what happens on your team when you have people who may be less suited for the job promoted for whatever reason, and then you still have to manage that competition in your team, and it very well may be that they're not the right fit for the role, but that's out of your scope of jurisdiction.
So what do you do when this is interesting. What do you do when you have a team and somebody gets promoted and everyone thinks they're unfit to lead the team? Yeah. I'm gonna ask a question back to you. What effect do you think that has on their performance if they know that everybody else on the team kind of doesn't believe in what they're doing or believe in them?
I mean, that would be a lot of editorializing on my part.
Yeah.
You know, but in those situations, particularly in a creative aspect where everything can be subjective, like how do you still nurture the growth of the folks that maybe you feel like have a stronger trajectory and still get the productivity out of them while adhering to the hierarchy of
It sounds like you must be in a position where you're trying to like help shelter the team and shepherd them through like this manager.
I still want to respect my boss's decision.
Yeah.
So,
I have an answer. I have an idea. I call it stealth mentoring. So there's overt and covert missions, right? Like how do you covertly mentor this person who got promoted who's screwing it up in a way that will both empower your team and help that person? Because honestly, managing people is really hard, and maybe this person's a terrible person deep down inside, but in general, I think they probably want to do a good job and might not know quite what to do. So like passing some information up and covertly helping them could actually set up your whole team for success. Yeah. Panelists, any last words, anything we missed, didn't talk about that you're just dying to say? And quickly, because we're out of time.
One snippet of really good advice.
Okay.
I would say mine is, and I'm going to say this quickly, is don't take credit for work that was mostly done by your direct reports.
Nice.
It really alienates you from the team, and if you don't do it, like they will really, really respect you.
They will love you if
they
you
will
do.
love you. Yes,
Yeah.
I got a lot of credit for something I mostly didn't do. I gave the leadership part, and I turned around and said, no, I actually didn't do this. Michelle did, not same girl as I mentioned earlier. I didn't. Michelle did 90% of this, and meeting finished. And afterwards, she said, you know, I've never had a boss do that before. Like not actually take credit for something that it never happened to her in her career before, and she had quite a long career already.
Nice, Bryn.
A piece of advice?
Last
Something that
thought,
we
final
haven't
word. Yeah.
I often feel like I'm a really different type of manager than most managers out there, and I've wondered why. Like, what is it? And to me, I think it's that I still try to be myself when I interact with all of my direct reports. Like, we're just the same. We just happen to have slightly different roles. And so a lot of it comes down to getting to know them, listening to them, feeling collaborative with them. Like, if they need something, we'll do that together. There's a lot of like a together mentality. But really, I delegate most stuff to them. But I think the more I can be genuine and be myself, they feel an attraction to me, or like they want to get to know me better, just like I want to get to know them better. And when I think back to the bosses that I have not had good relationships with, it's when they've put on a different face when they're a manager than when you see them interact with other people. Just try to be yourself.
Cool. Be yourself.
I guess my piece would be model the behavior that you would like to see in those that you are managing. Very simple.
That was mine, but I would say, I think I've said this before, but if your job is not to be a manager. Your job is to do work and get the team to do work. So lead with that and have fun and be inspired. Because if you are, then that goes a long way. If people feel that, if you feel like you're a manager and you have to do this and it just feels like work and process, your team is gonna feel that. The work is gonna suffer. It's just gonna be probably not great. But if you believe in it, you believe in what you're doing, I think that's what I would lean on.
And I'll just have the final word here. I'll give you two questions that I like to ask. One is, what do you think we should do? You say that to people and they kind of light up. They're like, well, you want to know what I think? Especially like the quietest person at the table, right? Hey, what do you think we should do? It just brings out their intelligence. And then the next one is, and this is a question I just asked myself, like, how can I bring out the best in this person? And this comes from making a lot of mistakes when I was first leading, not at my own company, but at my last company. I was promoted to the vice president of creative and led the Menlo Park office for this agency, and I was the second youngest person there. And I feel like I burned a few bridges and like kind of was really concerned about how I looked. And later these people go on and they're doing really amazing things. So these people won't always report to you, and they might someday have a job that you envy, and they also might be in a position to hire your agency or your company or you for something. So having a long-term perspective, and like in the midst of like maybe you're really frustrated because they screwed something up really bad, remembering like, how can I bring the best out of this person? And how, like, I always think like, especially in the midst of something really hard, if I'm gonna have to fire somebody or something, like, how can I do this in a way that this person is going to be better off and will still want to come to my funeral? Like, you know, like, how can we still do this? And I actually had to fire somebody who was awesome. She was just too New York tough for a touchy-feely California office. And I felt like I was setting her free. Like, no, you don't need to change anything about you. You just need to swim in a pool that suits you better. And she actually later told me that was a really nice experience, even though it was like a firing. So, yeah, how can I bring out the best in these people? I want to honor a few people, too, who are here. Well, first, let's thank our panelists with a nice round of applause. You guys are awesome. Susanna's behind the new Apple Store. Jennifer's behind the new MoMA, like all this cool stuff happening. I didn't quite get to concrete projects you're doing, Bryn, but I'm sure it's mind-blowing. You can ask her after. I wanted to honor the president of our chapter, who's sitting back here, Phil Hamlet. Hi, if you don't know Phil, he's right there. And we have a past president here too, David Asari. Nice to see you, David. Last of all, a hand for the creative group and for me. Thank you guys so much. Hope you have a great night.
And if you want to continue the conversation afterwards, Murphy's Pub is just around the corner. Turn right.
Lots of
and then
people go
turn
to
right.
Murphy's Pub after.
That's where we usually all hang out afterwards if anyone would like to come.
Thank you.
I just want to say hi. I'm actually chair of IDSA. But I design sex toys. I have my own company. Do you really? Yes. This is one of our products.
Oh, I've seen this. So I moved to Hoffelberg, so
Oh, wow.
for a ride, I can't drive you today.
That's okay.
Otherwise, I want to offer you a driving.
Let me just turn this off.